business, item 12. And is there a motion?
Resolved that the reading into the minutes of the text of the ordinance entitled an ordinance appropriating $980,000 for costs in connection with the O'Brien Stadium athletic field improvements and authorizing the issue of $980,000 bonds and notes to finance the appropriation is hereby waived. The full text of the ordinance having been distributed to each member of the council and copies being made available to those persons attending this meeting, and that the full text of the ordinance be recorded with the minutes of this meeting.
Second.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor and Councilor Naeem. All right, again, this is for the waiving of the reading of the minutes. All in favor? Aye. Any nays? Abstentions? Thank you. That passes 9-0-0. Is there a motion?
I move to introduce an ordinance entitled an ordinance appropriating $980,000 for costs in connection with the O'Brien Stadium athletic field improvements and authorizing the issue of $980,000 bonds and notes to finance the appropriation.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Naeem. All right. I'm sorry?
Mr. Councilman Smith has his hand up.
Oh, no, I think it's the little cursor.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
I was like, wait a minute. No problem. I appreciate that. All right. Oh, my goodness. All right, so we've just introduced the ordinance, and so at this time, yes, I'm sorry, I'm still laughing at the little hand. Sorry, that was cute. If there's any discussion, councilors, please feel free to comment. And I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Souza, first.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to invite up Jenna Zinke. Jenna is our project engineer, and she is sitting in for Suzanne Choate, who is unable to be here this evening. As you know, the turf field at O'Brien Stadium was installed in 2014. It was a recommendation, one of the top recommendations out of the town-wide athletic field master plan that was completed in 2013 under the direction of the town council. And so I'm going to let Jenna provide an overview of the project scope, and then I will talk a little bit about, provide some additional background.
Good
Jenna?
evening. As Mr. Souza stated, the synthetic turf field at O'Brien Stadium was originally installed in 2014 as a part of improvements to the complex. The turf has reached the end of its expected life and is in need of replacement. The proposed replacement will include removal of the turf surface, fine grading of the existing stone base, and installation of a shock pad, turf surfacing, and sand and crumb rubber infill. The project will also include the installation of ball safety netting behind each goalpost. The project is included in the capital improvements program for fiscal year 2025, and at this time, bonding in the amount of $980,000 is being requested for the replacement of the turf. If approved, the project is expected to begin in June of 2025 and be completed in early August.
Thank you, Jenna. And I just want to add to that. The replacement project has been in the CIP, identified in the CIP since fiscal year 21, and based upon our knowing that the life expectancy was in that 10 to 12 time frame, we had included in that as a planning item. As part of that 2013 master plan, it was clearly identified that we were in need for an overhaul of our athletic fields, particularly at the high school and Sage Park complex. And part of that reason was that the intensive use that the field at the main field at O'Brien Stadium receives, and it was a challenge for from a public works maintenance perspective to maintain a good safe stand of natural turf there, and mainly because of the heavy use that it got. So there was no ability to quote unquote rest that field, and so after a really hard fall season, then using other sports in the spring, would be challenged to be able to have a quality and safe field to play on. That was part of the decision the town council made back 10-plus years ago to approach the solution with a synthetic field. The drainage system that's there now is designed for a synthetic turf. It's tailored to that type of system. It allows that play to occur safely during and shortly after rain events. And the playability of the field is important because there's I believe there's 5 sports that can be accommodated at different times on that synthetic surface, and which provides some relief to other fields, particularly that are used by the high school for interscholastic sports. And so there was dramatic increases in hours of use over the former natural turf. It was estimated back in 2013 that just the Board of Education hours usage would increase from about 155 hours annually to approximately 500 hours. And so that's just to demonstrate the versatility that the synthetic field provides in terms of programming. And certainly there are a whole host of questions that have been raised over the years, and also during in other communities, and as well this evening by residents. So those are all little background information, and Jenna and I can try to answer questions at this point regarding the project before you.
Thank you, Mr. Souza. Councilors? Deputy Mayor, Councilor Ellavelle, Councilor Pelkey.
So, Mr. Souza, I understand that we have another capital improvement plan design coming up, right? Is that correct? We have something, the 10-year plan, we have some kind of plan, we're going to be. Conservation plan.
Which is a much broader, high-level
Right.
Planning process.
So if we wanted to take a bite at the apple of evaluating the field status, we could probably think about putting it in that, or no?
I would say not at a detailed level.
Okay.
It could be a high-level review, but I would say if we wanted to take a look at our athletic fields once again, it would be a separate, distinct study with bringing on a different type of consulting professional services.
And then just, may I ask one more question? So my understanding is if we wanted to switch over, we need to do something by September this year for the field.
That is, September timeline is basically, the construction occurs in the summer. And so if we didn't do it for the September timeframe, replace it, then we would be looking at needing to do the construction.
Right, and it's not really practical because it's not safe right now to.
No, we're not stating that it's not safe.
Okay.
That's just that it's at, the recommended is 10 years to replace not the full drain. We're not doing a full drainage subsurface system, and Jenna, you can correct me if I'm misstating this, but we're basically looking at the synthetic surface itself, material itself.
In the shock pad.
In the shock pad, not the
Which is
full.
new, right?
Shock pad would be an added addition to the.
And then do we have any other land available that would serve as a practice field or other kind, that we could also locate the other sports so that you wouldn't have so much use on that field for the fall sports?
We would have to re-examine that, but essentially what we'd be doing is putting folks on to either the outfield of the varsity baseball field, or one of those fields there, which again has created challenges in the past, or be able to perhaps put additional uses onto the Sage Park natural grass areas that are there. But it would be a scheduling. Should we go back to the same challenge we had 10 years ago with a scheduling challenge, especially during that fall and spring, we had even examined doing off-site transportation to other fields at that time. Those are alternatives that the council had explored and chose not to go that way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Ellavelle?
Thank you very much, ma'am. So two questions that come to mind. We heard a member of the public make some comments related to the safety of these sorts of artificial fields in respect to off-gas, effectively, I believe it's off-gassing is the primary issue. I know I've heard from at other times about I guess they call it crumb, which is the rubberized stuff they put onto the field. And I'm making a wild guess, since everything is plastic, is PFAS, and PFAS we know is a bad word lately, and it has problems. Do we have any information relative to the safety of this thing relative to kids?
So I'm going to speak just based on some information, that knowledge that I have, and this is coming from essentially from the Connecticut Department of Public Health's website, where they have a whole host of information there. According to the Connecticut Department of Public Health, they're saying there's no clear evidence of the health effects from playing on fields with synthetic turf. Again, there's qualifiers there, and I would encourage folks to take a look at that. But that's a statement from. They're also saying is that there is been some research done relative to PFAS in the turf fields. The research that was cited on the Connecticut DPH page did not indicate at this time, this was a 2019 study, that there was not and again, there's not a large body of, at least from what I could find on DPH website, they were not referencing a large body of study relative to PFAS, but they were not indicating that it was leaching, that there was PFAS there, but it was not at a what they would say a level of concern, is essentially the term that at least again that was at the body of work that they had reviewed, which is limited. So they're basically saying that it does not pose a exposure concern to the users of the field. That's as there. So that's the again that's the information that we have at this point. I know that there's a variety of different perspectives on this in terms of both the impacts to the athletes and or the overall kind of environmental aspects of it.
To add to that, the suppliers we're proposing to use for the turf itself, the turf and the shock pad, they are PFAS-free manufacturing suppliers, so their facilities don't introduce PFAS into the turf and the shock pad itself. As far as crumb rubber goes, there are also newer reports from the Environmental Protection Agency that they released their recent update on in 2024, April of 2024, reviewing studies that have come out. A number of these studies show that there is not a significant health impact based comparative to background levels that we're seeing with chemicals in the environment. So those are also reports I would encourage people to take a look at.
If I may ask one other question, let's say for conversation's sake, we decide we're going to go back to natural grass. If I'm not a lawn care guy, how long is the field going to have to be left dormant before it can be used if you were to go back to natural grass? And what would the cost be?
So there would be a significant construction activity that would have to occur. As Mr. Souza mentioned, the current drainage and base is designed for an artificial turf field. So there's actually a stone base under there to provide a nice level surface. We would need to remove that and provide appropriate subgrade fill in order to then place a natural grass field on there. We could then plant grass, and typically when your initial growth, you're typically looking at what ends up being 2 sports seasons in order to grow sufficient natural grass in order to do it. That could be shortened if you went to sod, but that also would increase the costs. I don't have a direct cost estimate for what that would be to do all that work. That's certainly something we could put together. The As far as resting the fields go, we would have to do a combination of resting and deprogramming from in 2014, as Mr. Souza mentioned. We greatly increased from that period when we last had natural grass field on there, the usages. So you would have to, there's a lot more games and practices occurring on that field than there was at that time. So we would have to find first new homes for those games that are occurring, because there would be maintenance in between as well. You can imagine if you have a football game, especially in a rainier weather, and that field gets really heavily used, you need to then have repairs made so that we have a nice level surface so that other athletes are not at risk of injury playing on it.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Council Pelkey.
Have we explored other alternatives? And again, I'm not a lawn care expert either. But I do recall, for example, that hybrid fields are a thing. For example, Lambeau Field, home of the Green Bay Packers, they had a turf, and they had I was there, I couldn't go out in the field when I was visiting, this was maybe 10 years or so ago. They had their natural turf, but they were actually going through with a sewing machine, as they like to call it, and putting in ribbons, and I don't remember the material, but it created a hybrid field. So that you had, and actually as they pushed those ribbons down into the field that would act like grass, it would actually somehow encourage root growth and hardiness and other things. And so I'm just curious if we looked at any other hybrid models, or if we simply said, it's too expensive to go back to natural grass, let's just find the best replacement for what we currently have. Just curious if we looked outside what we're doing.
I can't say we looked at any hybrid methods. It's something I've not heard of and would have to look into. We did consider alternate. We did consider alternate infill materials.
Sorry about that.
One day stumbled upon a special notebook where, upon reading contents learned,
Oh my gosh, turn it off.
Technology is wonderful.
Scared the crap out of me.
Don't touch it.
Not touching it.
Don't
Do I need
leave
to
it
put my
be.
AC/DC?
God. Just like turned on. I was like, what just happened? My apologies.
Sorry.
If you need a minute, that's fine.
Sorry about that.
We did consider there are alternate infill methods that the engineering department looked at with our proposed suppliers. One of the concerns that came up was just what the life cycle of those are. They're newer products to the market, so we don't have as much data and information about those materials. One thing we did do is the inclusion of the shock pad also allows for a lesser amount of chrome rubber to be used. It increases the amount of sand infill that's used to be 65% of the mix. So the majority of the infill used with that shock pad being in place will be sand, with the remaining 35% being the chrome rubber.
So then if we have sand in there, is that open and able to get weeds and other natural growth? I don't understand how that works.
We have not seen any. There's currently sand on the field as well right now.
It sounds like
It's
there's
sand and
more, so
chrome.
that's
Yes, it's not something that's seen. This is pretty widely used. It's not seen, and with your regular grooming that DPW already performs on the fields, they run rakes and grooming equipment over it, which cleans up anything that's left behind, including if there were anything that were to grow there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Naeem.
Thank you so much. You may not have the answer to this question, but in the last 10 years, have we seen any significant turf burns on athletes or reports of?
I would have to look into that, but I do not know of any reports, but I would have to follow that up.
Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was on this council sitting in one of these seats when the town looked at the benefits of switching to artificial turf. And I can distinctly remember that injuries were lessened, but most important was that the artificial turf allows for a lot more use of varying sports in comparison to natural grass. And I think you mentioned earlier that in a football game, if it rains a lot and cleats get to scraping on it, that field needs a lot of preparation work before it can be used for another game. So I vividly remember the multiple benefits of artificial turf over regular grass. I also know that having a grandson that plays football, I pray all the time he goes on the field that he doesn't get hit and broken into pieces, but he's a tough little fella, that I don't think anybody up here knows how much use that field gets. For example, on some Saturdays, there are out-of-town, out-of-state games that are played back-to-back on those fields, and those games are planned in advance, so parents and grandparents can pack up these kids and move them all around. Windsor is doing a lot of playtime on that field. I did hear Mr. Weiner talk about maybe some PFAS and some chemical issues with that. I would think that, first off, we need to do something, and we need to stay with something, some hybrid or something of artificial turf versus natural grass, because it won't take all the wear and tear that this field does. But secondly, if there are concerns, that we normally would bring in the vendors and say, here are some concerns that our residents have. You explain what these concerns are all about. And lastly, I'll just say that as far as injuries go, these kids they fall on that stuff a lot, and I dread to think that they were going to go back to solid ground to play on. But in my opinion, from what I've seen, the injuries are a lot less. Again, I'm not the expert on this whole thing, but I wouldn't want to delay putting in new artificial turf, and also know that to allay the fears of our residents, we need to have the vendors come in, and maybe they can tell us stuff that we just don't know. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I ask, how do you treat this artificial grass? Do you use chemicals to repair it, or how would that be done?
No, the primary, I guess, maintenance that goes into it is the infill can shift slightly, so our Public Works staff will take a grooming equipment that helps spread it out in areas that are heavily used, like the center spot for soccer or the hash marks for football. If the infill is kind of moved out, they'll add some infill there and clean out. But there's no chemical treatments or anything that Public Works applies for regular maintenance of the field.
So the turf is just repaired as there's damage done to it, is that correct?
If there were damage to the turf itself, sections could be cut out and replaced, but primary general maintenance you see over the lifespan of it is just about grooming it, putting infill in, adding infill when appropriate, and spreading it out to keep an even playing surface.
And one more. Is there any concern about the ingestion of any of this turf for the children that are out playing on this turf?
So that's part of what the reports that I referenced kind of talks about, is what ways athletes come in contact with it. Again, a number of them don't show a significant risk to what the athletes are seeing. Another piece with the proposed system we have is that's slightly different than what we have out there right now, is it has an under layer of a root zone layer of material to help keep the infill in place better. So that you would have less material moving around. I think we've all seen, when you get the little black spots that kind of fly out and stuff. And that's designed to help both from a safety standpoint, keep it in place so that we're not constantly needing to replace it, but also keeps it from flying up in the air where it's, not contained.
Okay, and this design is already in place.
The root zone would be what we're proposing. That's on the turf that we're proposing to place.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I know that this has been a long-going conversation, as Councilor Walker alluded to, that yes, Councilor Eleveld, I'm sure from our time on the Board of Ed, we've been talking about the field and ensuring what was going to work best for our athletes. And so I think the questions that have come up definitely in regards to, and I know that our town manager will get that information from the athletic director, but I just don't recall myself hearing about like severe burns or anything like that from athletes, but I know it's information that will come forward. So we know that we have to do something because we do have sports teams that are highly competitive in our town, and we have to figure out how to move forward. And if the field is in need of a repair, then we have to come to something to ensure that it's going to happen. So I think the conversation, it's a robust one. As far as it was mentioned about vendors, I believe vendors have come and spoken to this. Can't remember if it was either at the Board of Ed side, but I know that we've had interface with vendors in regards to, I think the word used was some sort of hybrid piece. So, okay. So, councilors, I don't know, Councilor Eleveld.
If I may, Madam, may I ask if you might be able to, and I don't want an exact number, but are we talking, and not for right now, but are we talking $250,000, $500,000, $2 million to replace the field with turf and then, or real grass in the old-fashioned way, not using turf? And how long that means our fields will not be used? I think that would be information for the next meeting. And also, if we can find out about the burns.
The burns
and or injuries, I think in general would be a.
But I think it's both sides, because I know and I shouldn't say I know, there has been conversation that injuries on grass fields can really, really be bad. So I think we need to see all of that. So I think the pieces, as we move forward, the number of burns, if there were any, the cost involved, as well as injuries on a grass field, as well as injuries on the turf. And I think that's how this whole turf conversation came into play, is just I don't want to use the term buoyancy, but just the absorption as athletes are playing. And then lastly, thinking about how the grass is going to be maintained, because we know that many of us still call, I won't name any names, but we call those folks to make our grass look green, and we know that's we know that's not what we should be doing. So if we go back to a grass field, we would not want that for our students either, to be playing on grass field with pesticides. So yes, so just wanted to add that, just his historic context as well, and thinking about how do we get the information that we need to move forward.
Madam Mayor,
Councilor Walker.
I'm agreeing with you on everything you just said.
He had to say it at least one time for the night, right?
Yeah, really.
I
had to have once tonight.
At least once tonight, right?
Yes, once. Let's hope it doesn't happen again.
Okay, no, but I'm just saying, call a thing, right? Okay.
No, but in reality, I know I joke around a lot, but I sat in this room when the vendors presented the data that showed that injuries are lessened with artificial turf over regular grass.
Yeah.
That was stated in here. Yes.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
All right, so it looks like we've lost the counselor. Okay, well, counselors, do you have any other questions, comments? All right, are you ready for a vote? All right, Deputy Mayor, we've had a long conversation. If you can restate the motion.
Yeah, it was
Thank you.
a motion to introduce an ordinance entitled, an ordinance appropriating $980,000 for the costs in connection with the O'Brien Stadium athletic field improvements, and authorizing the issue of $980,000 bonds and notes to finance the appropriation.
All right, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Abstentions? That motion passes 8-0-0. Thank you, counselors.